Our next topic of conversation, or rather two topics, are going to be about void methods with parameters and also non-void methods. So last time that we talked, we were looking at constructors and then also void methods. And so we were specifically spending a lot of time talking about these feed and produce waste functions. They're both void methods. So what that means is the fact that these methods, they don't actually return anything. They do print things out, like system.out.println is going to print this to the screen. But I want to be very clear about something, the fact that there's a difference between printing something out to the console versus actually returning a value. And so the second keyword here after public is going to tell me, in this situation, the second keyword is going to tell me what I'm returning. Void, meaning nothing, means that it's going to return nothing. And that I can just call it and nothing's going to be returned. And so generally what's going to happen then is that these void methods are going to do something kind of behind the scenes for me. So let us take a look at another example. Oh, by the way, we're now in Duck version 3 at this point. So I've got some methods down here. Let's go ahead and I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. So this is set name and occupation. So set name and occupation is actually going to use two other methods that I have. That would be the set name and set occupation methods that I have here. You'll notice that both of these are, actually all three of them, are void methods. They're not going to return anything. But what they do have that's different than what we've been talking about is the fact that they take in a parameter. All of them take in parameters of strings. So let's go ahead and take a look at what exactly that looks like. So let me go ahead and get rid of all these things. So let me make a new duck. So now we're on duck version 3 at this point. Duck 1 then is going to be equal to new duck, duck v3. And we're going to take in, all right, so I'm going to take in, actually, let's just use our default constructor. So that's actually, let's go back real quick. I shouldn't call it a default constructor, but I made a new constructor here. In fact, I pared it down to only having two constructors. One that takes in my name and my ID and occupation, and then this one that takes in nothing. It makes my default duck. So it gives the name to be default duck, gives me ID number 999, and then tells me that they're unemployed. So I'm just going to use that instead, actually. So duck v3, there we go. And then I'm going to, oh hey, since I have this here, let's go ahead and use it. Just go ahead and print this out to make sure I actually have a duck created. So let's go ahead and run this. So Java compile, this is duck developer. Oh shoot, I'll cycle back around. Duck developer.java, marvelous. And then java duck developer. Okay. So we'll notice that I'm in the default constructor. That was my default constructor that I made. It takes in no parameters, which is great. And then I've got a new duck. Its name is default duck, ID 999, occupation unemployed. Okay, exactly what I wanted. So let's start actually manipulating these things in. So if I go back and I look at these methods here, scroll down to the bottom, the get occupation method, what it would do is that I can call this, sorry, not get occupation, that's not what I want. Set occupation, what it will do is I can call this on my duck that I just created and change its occupation. Same thing with set name. You'll notice in each of these that they'll actually go ahead and change the name, and they'll print out this statement about the name being changed or the occupation being switched. So let's go ahead and do both these at the same time using the set name and occupation method. So this is a void method. It's not going to return anything, but what it will do is take in two parameters, which are strings, and do some changing of things behind the scene. So I'm going to call this just like I called my other void methods using the dot operator. So I am going to say duck, duck1, dot, and so duck1 is what's being called upon. What am I actually wanting to call? It is, I forgot what it's called, set name and occupation. There it is, thank you. And it's going to take in a name then and an occupation. So in this case, I'm going to change the name to Steve. And then my occupation will be engineer. Perfect. So I'm changing both of these things at the same time. No big deal. It should change both those values. Let's see what gets printed out. Actually, before I do that, one quick aside. What you'll probably hear me talk about a lot, I'll use the words interchangeably, but that's incorrect, is the difference between parameters and arguments. In this case, the parameters are these strings of name and my string occupation, because those are the things, those are like the placeholders for what I'm taking in. There are a couple string values, name and occupation. These things I'm placing inside, the actual values I'm placing inside, are called arguments. They're the actual values themselves. So yeah, I mean, we use those interchangeably a lot, incorrectly so, but it's a small thing. So yeah, I'm gonna print this out. I'm gonna run it, and we're gonna see what's gonna happen. Okay, compile, marvelous, run. Okay, so we'll notice a couple things here. Number one, I'm the default constructor. That was there before, not shocking. This part at the end tells me that, hey, I've got my duck. Its name is Steve. 999 is the ID number, and then his occupation is engineer. But I have these 3 lines inside of here. I have default duck should now be known as Steve! Exclamation point. Steve has switched occupations from unemployed to engineer, which is good for him. And then, wow, what an exciting time to be Steve. Let's go ahead and make sure we really understand what's going on here. So I used my set name and occupation method in this situation, took in the 2 parameters, and what it did actually called the set name and set occupation methods. And so if I use these set name and set occupation methods, it will actually call them. And so the order here matters. We'll notice that the first thing that's going to be done is I'm going to call set name before anything else gets done here. I'm going to call set name, which is up here someplace, which is going to end up printing out that this duck shall be now known as whatever, which was the first line that got printed here. Default duck shall now be known as Steve. Perfect. Then set occupation was called, and I run all the way through the set occupation method, which includes the statement has switched occupations from, which was the second statement here. And then finally, I will do this last part here. So after both these things are done and called, I can use this, or I can print out this last statement. Wow, what an exciting time to be Steve. So there's a couple things worth noting. Is that number one, I can call methods in my class from other methods in my class. And then number 2 is maybe an obvious statement, but the order very much matters, right? The order in which I call them matters. And so I will do everything inside set name before I do anything in set occupation, but I'll do all those things before I print out this final line. So these void methods work just like the previous void methods I had. It's just now that we have these parameters that are going to be coming in and doing something. So the last thing then, the last type of method that I want to look at are non-void methods. So what happens if I do want to actually return a value? And spoiler, we've actually been using one of these all along, which is the toString method, but we've got other ones as well. So for example, I have several of them here. It's very common to have what we call getter and setter methods. So a method that sets the name and then a method that gets the name. So in this case, what getName does is instead of being void in my signature line here, it's public, and then I'm saying what I'm going to return is a string value. So what happens here is that you'll notice this method is not printing anything out. What it's actually doing is returning the value. So I can actually grab this value in the writing of whatever program I'm doing or working with and use that value again later. For example, what this could look like is, let's stop printing this out using the toString method and let's kind of do it on our own. So here's what I can do is that, so I've changed the name and occupation of duck1 here. What if I, a couple lines later, have forgotten what it is? What I can do is I can create a new string variable, and this would be called, name of duck. Wow, duck1, and what I can set equal to is duck1 dot get name. Right. So this will return the string value for the name of my duck. So what is name of duck1 getting? It is getting the value of that name that's being returned from that method. And so now, instead, if I want to print this out and figure out what the name of that duck was, I can print out name of duck1, no problem. And it's going to have taken in that value that got passed back to it, that got returned. So I'll go ahead and save this, and I'll run. And it's going to tell me what the name of that duck was, and the duck was named Steve. Awesome, exactly what I wanted. Okay, so an important thing, not important thing, but worth noting here is that generally speaking, having all these print statements in my code is not real great programming. I was doing it in here, not because I'm a bad programmer, though that might be a good reason, but because we had to show what we were doing somehow. There's actually a better way, and that better way is to return values. Okay, there is still a place for void methods, like they're still important. But if I have the ability to return a value instead of printing something out all the time, I should do that. So in future programs, I will not be kind of bogged down with all these print statements, because it kind of makes it a mess in my program when I'm writing it, that I have to sift through all of these statements that are being printed out whenever I'm doing different things. I only want to see things in my console when I really, really want to see them, when I print them out myself, and not in the methods here. Okay. So let's see. So just out of curiosity, so this is actually returning the value of a string to name of duck1. What happens if we try to do something like, so set name and occupation was not did not return anything. It's a void method. What if I try to store that value somehow? Like, I don't know what it's going to be stored as. Let's just go ahead and say it's a string. But so this is a string, and then what am I trying to get from this? I don't really know. Let's just call it temp for now. So the question is, does it return anything? Like, this was a void method. Set name and occupation was a void method. So if I save this and I run it, rather I compile it, it tells me, well, let's see here. Error, incompatible types. Void cannot be converted to a string. Ooh, that's interesting. So what's happening here is that this is a void method. It's not returning anything, or rather, kind of what it's returning is void. Okay, so there's nothing there. And so what they're saying is that we can't convert this voidness to a string value. It's kind of like the same thing as, okay, so this is garbage, obviously. I don't want to do this. It's kind of like if I mistakenly tried to store the name of this duck in an integer variable. I'm going to get the same type of error here. At least I think so. That would make sense, right? Yeah. I'm going to get the same type of error. String cannot be converted to an integer. Okay. So if I ever try to use a void method and assign it to be some value, I'm going to get an error, which makes absolute sense. It doesn't actually return anything. Okay, so that's happy code now. That works. Let us point out one more thing. Just like before, when we had these constructors, so duck v3 and duck v3, we called this overloading for constructors. And so what it did was, based on how many parameters I'm taking in, Java will know which of the duck v3 constructors to use. Well, overloading does not just exist for constructors, it exists for methods as well. So for example, I have two methods down here. They're both called swim. And so how is Java going to know the difference between them? Well, the answer is based on the parameters that have been taken in. So what these were supposed to do is that they're both void methods. And if my duck were to go for a swim and I were not to give it a parameter, I'm just going to assume that it's going to swim 1 unit, 1 mile, let's say, which would be a long way for a duck. But then my other function here, my other method, takes in a distance. And so I can take the current distance of the duck and add to it whatever distance it's taking in, which would be great. And so what these do is, Java will have to make a decision on which one of these to use based on how many parameters you pass it. So not just based on a number, but if I had another swim method that took in a string, which I'm not sure how that would work exactly, but if it took in a string, it could decide between those as well. So I can overload methods just like I overloaded constructors. to do multiple different things with the same kind of goal in mind, right? So that was everything to do about methods. We've now covered void methods and void methods with parameters, and we've also covered non-void methods, those with parameters and those without. And so these are all the different methods that are kind of available to me within a class that I can use. And so this is kind of like the last video in this section of like introduction to the classes, because the next thing we're going to do is talk about strings. But yeah, this kind of sums up all the different things I can do with the class. So until next time, that's all I have to say. There you go.